Am I wrong for telling my son I was disappointed after he and his wife lied about my grandson's birth date? My son, 23, and his wife just had a baby boy. Everyone is overjoyed and excited, but there have been some issues that have risen recently. When my daughter-in-law was pregnant, I suggested that I host a welcoming party for my grandson right after she got discharged from the hospital. I made arrangements and even emptied a room for them to stay, but for some reason she was against it and said she'd rather spend the first few weeks at home with her newborn. Not only that, but she said no to the welcoming party. My husband and I talked to my son and he said, "We'll see." But just a couple of days ago, we found out that my daughter-in-law had given birth 2 weeks ago and no one knew about it. My nephew told me and I immediately called my son. He confirmed it. I told him this was not acceptable, lying just because they didn't want a welcoming party and love and support being given from family. I told him I was disappointed because for one, he ruined our welcoming for our grandbaby, and also I invited family members and they're all rightfully disappointed as well. He said it was his last resort after I kept pushing and made his wife uncomfortable, but that was not appreciated because we were just trying to celebrate the new family member in a proper manner. We had an argument and he ended the call upon saying I ruined his joy for his newborn. My husband started texting him since he stopped replying to our phone calls and is now threatening to block my nephew for tattling, but I think that my nephew was decent enough to inform the family. Otherwise, God knows how long my son and his wife are going to hide their son just to keep us at arm's length. We've always been kind and welcoming to my daughter-in-law and her family. I don't know why she would do this and disrespect the family like that. On the other hand, some family members see it as a justified action because we insisted on the party. I don't know if you know this, man, but we are in the middle of a panoramic, and so I understand not wanting to expose your kids to people who you don't know where they've been when kids have such a compromised immune system. Back up.
Is it wrong for my husband to demand sexy time even though I don't want to? My husband and I have been married for 6 months. Unfortunately, our marriage was arranged by our families, and so far I have not been able to fall in love with him. I come from a very strict religion. My family and my husband's family believe that I should obey him, and it's been really hard for me to adjust to this. Before getting married, I had more freedom, but now I'm mostly home all day waiting for my husband to come home. I cook all of his meals and serve him while he's eating, and even if I'm not eating, he expects me to be sitting there with him. My husband is a very rich man, so he lets me go shopping whenever I want, but that's something I can't even do by myself. He always sends someone with me to go shopping, so I take advantage and buy really expensive designer things. Sometimes I spend $5,000 on a shopping day. This really never seems to bother him. Another thing I don't really like is that he rarely ever speaks to me. We have small talk every now and then, but we don't talk about important things, especially before we got married. We'd only seen each other a few times. I thought we'd have a really good relationship and be friends, but no. Sometimes I'll ask him what his day was like, and he just says it was fine. Other times I try to talk to him about his job, but he never really gives me a full answer. So honestly, I don't even know what he does. But my biggest problem with him is something else. He demands, you know what, sexy time. And I never really want to. I'm not in love with him and I'm not really attracted to him. On our wedding night, my family really pressured me into doing it. And it was horrible. And now whenever he wants it, I defend myself and it turns into a big fight. He even called my parents to complain. That's when he called my parents and complained to them that I wouldn't do it with him. He took me to my parents' house the following day. My dad was really angry with me and told me that I needed to obey my husband. I told him I never wanted to get married to begin with and that I didn't love him or was even attracted to him. My parents clearly didn't understand me. I went home and my husband basically coerced me into doing it. And it's not even like it's fun. He doesn't do anything to please me. It's all about him when we're doing it. One night he asked me to do it and I refused. He got so angry he told me that he didn't need to ask for my permission. I basically punched him in the face and since then he hasn't touched me. But then I felt so responsible and I actually apologized. Even though I was just defending myself. Everything's back to the way it was. I just have to do whatever he wants. All our friends think that we're incredibly happy. I couldn't take it anymore, so I opened up to one of my best friends. I told her everything that was going on and she told me that I should just leave my husband. But with my religion and my family, it would be really hard to do that. Then she told me that I should just take on a lover. And the idea kind of stuck in my head. Let me backtrack a little. When I was in college, I had met somebody, but nothing ever happened because I knew my parents wouldn't accept him. I reached out to him on Facebook and asked him how he was, and he happened to be arriving to my city soon. I asked him if he wanted to meet up and he said yes. And what happens next is crazy. When we saw each other, we instantly fell in love. Is it wrong for my husband to demand sexy time even though I don't want to? Disclaimers in my story time is sending me on Instagram. When I saw my old friend, it was like love at first sight. I could tell he was so happy to see me and we talked for hours. And the only reason I was able to go was because I told my husband that I was going to hang out with my best friend. So my best friend wasn't actually even with me. After that, my friend, let's call him Rob, Rob and I hung out a few more times, and eventually I opened up to him about what was happening with my husband. I explained to him I had an arranged marriage and that I wasn't in love with my husband. He also told me that I should divorce my husband, but then he told me why. He said that since college he's always had feelings for me. That means he's had feelings for me for 3 years. Well, long story short, he's my lover now, and nobody knows. Only my best friend. We see each other 3 times a week. I always go when my husband's at work, and I tell him that I'm gonna be with my best friend. And Rob and I meet at his place, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. I know that this is totally wrong, but I'm finally living. Of course, my husband still demands you know what, but I'm able to bear it now because I know I have someone else who actually loves me. I know this can't last forever though. I wish I could just fall in love with my husband, but it's not that easy. He's always so demanding, and he doesn't understand that his behavior is not normal. And I barely speak to my parents now. I've only been seeing Rob for a month, but he's gotta go back home eventually. What should I do?
I have 3 daughters, Alyssa 18, Tessa 16, and Jenna 14. We rarely argue. She drives her sisters around and she works full-time while in school. The only problem is that she can be unreliable. If you ask her to get groceries and be home by 5, she'll call you at 6:30 and ask you what you wanted her to do. And she doesn't do housework without being reminded 5 times. She has ADHD though, so that explains it. Now Jenna loves to argue. Jenna argues with my husband a few times a week. She's a pretty good kid otherwise. She's a straight A student, she plays soccer and is playing softball, and she helps around the house more than both of her sisters combined. Tessa is complicated. When she applies herself, she gets straight A's extremely easy. The problem is, she never does her homework, so she usually gets B's and C's. She and I have similar hobbies, and both my husband and I love talking to her when she's in a good mood. We don't fight often, but when we do, it's very dramatic. She's been insisting that she has ADHD or some other problem since she was around 11 because she can't focus, but my husband and I think that she's just trying to get shorter assignments and extra time like Alyssa. We got into an argument the other day because she has IBD and gets infusions every 6 weeks. She's very strict about never pushing it back for any reason after we tried to push it back once because we were going to be in another state and she got sick at 6 weeks and 3 days. It was 2 years ago and she's healthier now, but she still refuses to push it back. Her next infusion is scheduled for the 1st, but we're going to be on vacation from the 30th to the 4th, so I scheduled her infusion for the 8th. Her doctor approved it, but she started yelling at me about how last time I pushed her infusion back, she got sick and she isn't going to risk her health from our vacation. It became a very long and drawn out argument. When I picked her up from school, she put her headphones on so that she wouldn't have to talk to me, and then she locked herself in her room. She borrowed my laptop, so I looked in her backpack to see if she still had it. While I was looking, I saw passes from the school therapist. Tessa knows I don't want her talking to those therapists because people will find any reason to call CPS. Tessa admitted that she'd been seeing the therapist once a week for 2 years. She wouldn't look up at me from her coloring book and started crying and asked me to give it back because her therapist gave it to her for when she was having a bad day. I ended up shredding it and she hasn't left her room except for school and hasn't spoken since, so I wanted to know if I was the asshole. So, am I the asshole for shredding my daughter's coloring book?
Story time on how my twin sister almost killed my baby. Hi, my name is Jennifer and I'm 27 years old. I have a twin sister named Jaylene. Now, I didn't always have a twin sister. Like, quite literally, I was an only child for a long period of my life. Until I met her on Roblox. When I first had met her, I didn't know she was my twin sister. But for whatever reason, it seemed like the universe kept gravitating us towards each other. I video called her and she looked exactly like me, which scared me. And then we got closer and eventually met in person. And then my mom admitted that I had a twin sister this entire time. She said she had to give up one of us because she couldn't afford it financially, but now she could. So she ended up legally adopting her. And we lived together ever since we were like 14. At first, I was so excited to have a sister. But she did come with a lot of complications that I did have to get used to. She was schizophrenic. And she had a lot of PTSD from being in foster care. So I would wake up to her screaming in the middle of the night. She would always question me and have severe trust issues. But I was very patient with her as I was understanding. But I was too embarrassed to let any of my friends know because I cared too much about my popularity. Until one day I was hanging out with my friends in my bedroom and she busted in out of nowhere. So one day Jaylene just barged into my room and said, "I don't know what to do. Seraphine won't stop talking in my head again." And she looked in shocked because she didn't expect there to be other people around. All of my friends slowly started laughing and said, "Is this a show or is this an act?" My face turned completely red and I pushed Jaylene out. I grabbed her by the arm and talked to her in private and told her she can't just barge in like that again, and that I have a reputation to maintain. She just looked at me sad and I ended up walking away. After that, I was made fun of for about a week, but then it eventually stopped. This is why I was grateful we went to different schools, until one day my mom told me that my sister was transferring to my school, and that my mother was happy because we'd be spending more time together. But that's the opposite of what I wanted. So on the first day of school, I acted like Jaylene wasn't my sister. Everyone said I looked exactly like her, but I claimed that she was some weirdo I didn't know, and that she wears makeup and tries to look like me. Jaylene looked extremely hurt by this, and I felt really bad. But I was just a kid at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. So flash forward to when we graduated. We're about 18 years old around this time. So we both ended up graduating and going to good colleges. And flash forward to now when we're 25 years old. So I ended up getting married, getting pregnant, and having a son. One day, I had to go to the supermarket, and my sister happened to be over. I've never left my sister with my son before, but I decided I could trust her, now that she's matured and handled her issues more. So I told her exactly what to do as I'd be gone for just about 2 hours. And she said, "Okay, I'll be fine with that." So I come home and I kid you not, I hear my baby screaming like as if it was being murdered. I run into the room and my sister is shaking it, telling it to shut up. I grab my baby from my sister and tell her, what the hell is wrong with you? She said the baby wouldn't stop crying and I didn't know what to do. It was frustrating me. I kicked her out of my house and I didn't talk to her. She sent me multiple texts apologizing, but I still don't know whether or not I should talk to her. My baby is almost 7 months old. She could have killed him. So, I don't know, am I in the wrong for cutting her off? Should I talk to her again? I'm the reason my 13-year-old friend got kidnapped, and I'm honestly not mad about it. Hi, my name is Isabella, and I'm currently 19 years old. It's been a couple of years since this has happened, so I don't really think about it often, but I decided to share this story. So I had this friend growing up, and her name was Sophia. She was one of the most prettiest girls in school. Me and her were like best friends. So she knew I liked this guy, let's call him Adrian. He was one of the cutest guys in school, and Sophia knew that I liked him. But after I told her this, she specifically started getting closer and closer and closer to him. This obviously made me a little jealous. So one day I was venting on Discord and someone told me that they can solve my little problem. His name was Carter and he lived in my area, but the thing is he was 20 years old at the time. And he said that he liked me and he thought that I was cute and would do anything for me. So I asked him if he could take care of Sophia for me. And he eventually did, but I'm just going to be getting into a little bit of how I did it. So I met this guy off Discord named Carter. I vented to him about the issue a little bit and he said he could solve this little dilemma for me. He sent me an address and told me to have her go there and he'll handle her. I asked her how he would and he wouldn't tell me. I got a little scared, but I ended up going through with it anyways. So I went up to Sophia one day and I told her that Adrian wanted to meet her at this specific address for a little date. She asked me how I managed to do it and I said, I don't know, you're my best friend, so I'd do anything for you. And she fell for it. That was a total idiot move. Like seriously, meeting in the middle of nowhere? So Sophia ended up going and I texted her a couple of times but she never texted back. I asked her parents where she had went to pretend to seem like it wasn't my fault and they were panicking. I felt pretty bad but no one suspected me because I was volunteering to help find her. It's still been 3 years and I don't know where she went. I don't know what Carter did and I don't really care. So am I in the wrong?
I tricked a millionaire into marrying me. I was always a good student. I studied very hard and I always had good grades. I never got to have fun as a teenager and I didn't have friends. I just couldn't afford to mess up my life. My mom was a single mother and she was always working to look after my sister and I. I don't remember a day she was not working when I was growing up. It was always my dream to work in the medical field. The schools I had to go to pursue my dreams were very expensive. I can't even imagine the hours my mom had to work to put me through medical school. Because I knew how bad it was at home, I made a promise to myself to study very hard and make life comfortable for my mom and my sister. I studied very hard and passed my exams with flying colors. I thought I was finally going to get a good job and things were going to be okay, but the country I come from made this very difficult. I needed connections in high places in order to secure a job. I wrote application letters to lots of healthcare companies but to no avail. Your qualifications didn't matter if you didn't have connections. I was scared of disappointing my mom, so I told her I had gotten a job at one of the best healthcare companies in the country. Every day I would get dressed and act as if I was going to work, but I would just go and sit in a restaurant close to the company, buy water and wait for them to close and then I will go home. One day I saw a chance to get out of my miserable situation and I took it. Part 2 is One day I was in the restaurant when I overheard a man arguing with a woman in the corner of the restaurant. The man was screaming at the woman even though she was crying and saying she was sorry. His back was facing me. He turned around for a moment and I recognized him immediately. He was the owner of the medical company I had lied to my mom I was working in. I tried to listen to their conversation. I realized he was angry with her because she had disobeyed him. He had warned her not to dress a certain way, and she had disobeyed him and dressed that way when he was not around. She didn't know he had cameras in the house they were living in, and he had seen what she had done in one of the videos. She was begging him to forgive her, but he told her it was over, and that her things were in a taxi waiting for her outside. I was shocked he could break up with her this way over something so stupid. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I googled his name when I got home, and read about different women experiences with him. He was a sexist and a narcissist. He treated women like his property. He had married twice but had broken up with them over minor issues and left them with nothing to their name even though he was a millionaire. He had rules about the way his women must behave and dress around him. He hated independent and hardworking women. When you agreed to date him, he controlled every aspect of your life. I read all this in disgust. What kind of man does this? When I went to bed that night, I had already come up with a plan on how to utilize the information I had read on the internet and how to make this work to my advantage. Part 3 is I did my research on the owner of the medical company. Let's call him David. So I knew all the places he hung out. I also knew the kind of women he was attracted to. I knew he always had his dinner at a particular restaurant every Sunday. One Sunday, I dressed up and did my makeup like the way he liked it. When I got to the restaurant, he was already there. I intentionally sat close to him and ordered a soft drink. I knew he didn't like women who drank alcohol. After I was done with the drink, I called the waiter to come for his money. When he got to my table, I frantically started going through my purse and acted like I couldn't find my wallet. I broke down in tears and told the waiter my wallet had been stolen. I started crying immediately and acted like an innocent, soft woman who was lost. After some time, David came over to my table and asked the waiter what was going on. The waiter told him I had ordered a drink and was now claiming I couldn't find my purse. He asked of the amount and paid it for me. He was going back to his table, but I followed him and asked for his number. I acted as if I didn't know who he was. I told him I needed his account details so that I will wire him back his money. He said it was okay, but I insisted. He finally gave in and gave me his phone number. I called him that evening to thank him and asked for his account details, but he said there was no need for me to pay back the money. As I was about to hang up, he asked me if I would like to see him again. Of course I said yes, and that is how we started dating. And dating him was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But for his being with David was a full-time job. You have to talk a certain way and act a certain way around him. He hated certain colors, so you were not allowed to dress in those colors. You don't talk back to him when he's talking to you. And whether he is at fault or not, you always have to apologize. And he didn't like women who worked. I knew all this before I tricked him into dating me. I hid my educational background from him. I acted like a weak and submissive woman around him. I always agreed with him and did everything he wanted. Sleeping with him was so difficult, but I had a plan and I had to push through. A year later, he proposed marriage and I said yes. It was my job to stay at home and look after the house. There were cameras in every corner of the house. He provided all my needs for me and I never lacked anything. David made it clear from the start that he didn't want his wife to work, and he gave me an allowance every month. The allowance was supposed to be for designer clothes and luxurious hairstyles. I bought fake designer clothes with a little sum of the money. My sister was an hairdresser, so she did my hair for me. I was able to save the monthly allowance and start a small medical company of my own secretly. My company started booming after 2 years of establishment. All this while, David thought I was just a stupid, weak woman. 3 years into our marriage, I had 3 branches of my medical company in 3 cities. On our 3rd year anniversary, I left divorce papers on our bed for him, packed my clothes and left the house. He called me later that evening and told me I was a fool for leaving him. He said he wouldn't give me a cent of his money and that I would die in poverty. I just laughed at him and hung up the phone. When he realized a month later that I had my own company, he was shocked. He didn't even know I had gone to medical school. He had always thought I was just a naive and weak woman. His big ego was hurt so badly that he wanted a 50% share of my company. I took him to court, won the case, and even got a 50% share in his company, since we didn't even sign a prenup agreement. The thing is, he made his ex-wife sign this agreement, but I guess he thought I was stupid and uneducated and didn't know what a prenup was. Nothing is impossible for a determined woman.